Want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. John, thanks for having me aboard. My name is Noah Pusey, CEO and president of Ripple. I am happy to be here and just chat about developments in all sorts of different areas of human resources and organizational development.
Awesome. So Noah and I have gotten to know each other in the HR tech community, right? Initially in that space. And those of you who have been around HR tech for any length of time know that there are lots of tech du jours out there, and everything under the sun that wants to sort of help with this, help with that. And I'm not minimizing it or saying that negatively. I just mean it to say there's lots to kind of look at. But one of the things Noah and I wanted to chat about today is really much more historical, right? And for the time we're chatting today, we're going to talk about performance management. And this time of year, for some organizations, the year end brings about we've got to look back, right? Let me look at what's gone on in 2023 and figure out whether little Susie, little Joey, little Mikey did everything they were supposed to in the way in which I wanted them to do it. So contextually, Noah, like for your background, because obviously I don't know that everybody knows your background, what kind of road have you traveled when it came to performance? Were you in managerial roles that you've had to do things like this?
Yeah, so I'm a recovering attorney. I practiced law for about 20 plus years.
Yes.
And, I was raised on the traditional annual review. Professionally, I was raised on the once a year, 20 minutes with your manager, or in my case, the partner that oversaw us. And they, all things being equal, it was all billable hours. Personality really didn't play into it. If you made the firm a lot of money, then you got a nice bonus. If you didn't make them as much money as the other person, then you got a little smaller bonus. If you didn't make them any money, you probably were having a different discussion in terms of the future of your association with the firm. I had a great partner out of law school, but the legal community is probably a perfect example of how you shouldn't do things.
Yes.
So I went from the traditional annual review to more of a smaller firm, kind of reviewing people, but even the terminology, right? So annual review, and you mentioned it earlier, you're looking backwards. It's a review.
Yes.
It's not today. It's not tomorrow. Some discussions require yesterday, but yesterday is gone. The question is, what are you doing today and tomorrow and next quarter, next year? And so what the event has evolved from, in my humble opinion, is the annual review, static, sort of, one-off, to performance review, which encapsulates some other things. And now currently, we're in the talent assessment stage of how we assess everything about an employee, not just the P&L component, but also impact on culture, impact on experience, coworker experience. Most people that are quitting, especially millennials and Gen Zers, looking for other jobs, are not happy with the team they're on. They're not happy with their manager, right? It's been, you're in HR. 80% of people that quit their jobs quit their managers, right? The stat is probably the most overused stat in all of employment, but it's true. And so what my experience initially was very cut and dry. Okay, you made us X number of dollars. You're gonna get Y number of bonus and Z percentage raise. That evolved into more of okay, so do people like working with you? And so when I managed a smaller firm after I left the big firm, there was more intimacy. There was more personality played into it because you couldn't really lose yourself in your cubicle. You interacted more. So we had 50, 60 people. The other firm I was at had, I think, 700 to 800 employees. And then finally, when I went out on my own, I realized that it was more important to get a pulse of my 8 people. And that meant, not necessarily having regular weekly discussions, but certainly a couple weeks, 3 weeks, certainly every month. How you doing? Because the smaller the company, the more important each of those employees are. So if you have
but you're right, right?
Yeah.
But there was a couple of things in what you shared that I think are quite telling in terms of even where the experiences are for people today. Like when I think about performance management, I try to think about it, and I don't mean this to be funny, but I try to think about it as managing performance. Like, what is it that we're doing to help manage the performance of those for whom we've been given responsibility or charge over.
Right.
That's not a power trip when I say that. It's really, I'm supposed to look at my role in a supervisory capacity as one of equipping and encouraging, not power and control. So when I think about managing performance and I understand that my role is to be one of equipping and encouraging, then how do I equip these individuals and encourage them more in the tools and resources necessary so that their performance can reach the level that it needs to for their success? And I appreciate that how I just said that might seem a bit idyllic. I understand that. But I have to say, so what? Like, isn't that what it's supposed to be about? Is sort of looking to others and build them up, right? Like
100%. I think the most important thing about what you just said was you can't manage if management is one way. It can't be always driving down initiatives and piling up on your direct reports or your junior people. It's vital, probably no more vital than ever, to have some form of back and forth, to some regular engagement, feedback. You know, the numbers on engagement we could go through. Engagement globally is 24% of employees, which would make me sick if I owned a company in Europe. 13% has 13% of European employees are engaged. We're great. The U.S. has 31%, so we should, give us all. Yeah.
Right.
So
right.
What you need to do, in my humble opinion, to manage effectively is to find out more about the people you're managing and have some form of timely information share where you can understand, are your goals, initiatives realistic?
Well, and do you have them? I mean,
Yeah.
it's fascinating to me. There's always a couple of things that I find really fascinating when it comes to organizations that I get to be involved with, right? One, the basic of a job description is not found.
Unbelievable.
Right? And I always ask, I'm like, well, help me understand upon what basis performance appraisals are being done. If you don't have a job description, and does that mean you don't know what they're supposed to be doing? They don't know what they're supposed to be doing? What's happening here?
So what we do at Ripple is we gather information, and what we do is we give information to leaders, managers, owners about their people, their most important asset. And if they're not, then you're doing something wrong, right?
Right.
So when I go through data with we'll call them an enlightened leader, right? Someone that gets it because they want to help, they want to gather the information. And I say, okay, well, Susan's scores in curiosity are low. I saw that. The owner will say, I saw that. What, it's like, well, what's Susan's role? Does Susan's role in the company require high levels of curiosity and cooperation and consistency? These are some of the personality traits we track. And when the owner can't say that curiosity is or isn't, or maybe just kind of in the middle important about Susan, I don't need to know who Susan is. I know that the owner is disconnected. The owner doesn't understand his or her people. And that's, we talk all the time about culture and building and strengthening and scaling culture. Well, if you don't know who your people are and what they're supposed to be accomplishing, how can you do a performance evaluation effectively?
Well, and especially when you have your performance appraisal, if you're still doing the annual performance appraisal, and you connect that annual performance appraisal to compensation or merit increase.
The human brain only remembers things accurately for 6 weeks. So that stat alone means if you're doing anything on an annualized basis based on your experience with somebody, I mean, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
So if John crushes it in the last quarter of 2023, but has been just slouching around for the first 3 quarters, and I'm giving him his annual review in December, I'm going to remember the last 2 months, 3 months.
Well, I mean, all of that. I mean, you and I both know, right? There's this litany of bias to be considered of when it comes to traditional performance appraisal. That the recency bias you're talking about absolutely happens. The like me bias. I'm a little kinder to the guys or girls that are like me, to the women that are not like me, to the men that are not like me. I grade harder, whatever it might be. I use a 5-point scale. And so I have this like tread the middle water for everybody. And I'm always threes because I don't want to piss people off, but I also don't want them to think that they shouldn't be trying harder. Like we get into this sort of rubric of inefficiency. That's what we create in our mind, an inefficient rubric, which by terminology really should tell you that something's wrong, because that's not what a rubric is supposed to be, is inefficient. But right. It's supposed to be a context for measurement, so that everyone
can do
can
things
know.
accurately. So you can do things effectively,
so that everyone can know that it's moving that way. So, not just me. I'm not holding this little like cheat sheet behind the curtain here that everybody should be able to see this thing clearly.
Yep. I agree 100%. When you talk about unintentional bias, whether it's, the frequency, the like me's, it doesn't make managers bad people, because the unintentional biases have existed forever, right? But if you know they exist, and there's all sorts of science and data that supports the fact that they exist, but you just keep doing something because you've always done it that way, or because it's comfortable, or because you've been taught by the manager that you mentored with, it's time for change. Change is okay as long as there's a reason behind it.
There's a reason for it, a viable reason, not just new. And I think sometimes we do things even in. So I'll go the other way now, right? So we've got organizations that are saying, hey, we don't do that annual performance appraisal anymore. We're hip. We know not to do it. So we give weekly check-ins. And so we use our weekly check-in. So we've got 52 roughly, right? Meetings, vacations, that kind of stuff, but call it 50 meetings a year. And so we're not doing the annual thing. We're doing this weekly check-in. Look, fine, but what are you doing at the weekly check-in? There's tons of weekly check-ins that are like 3 minutes long. Well, how did you provide resource and encouragement towards the goals that you have, what objectives, whatever system you're using? Part of the problem is the goals are non-existent, or they shift a lot, right? And people are having a hard time sort of knowing where the prize is. What am I going towards again? A month ago, you told me this. Now the target's moved. And the weekly check-ins become very tactical, extraordinarily tactical. And so you have a bias towards tactical result only. It's very hard if you're asking someone to be astute in learning, to have transformational activity happening in them. You want someone to become more, let's say you're doing customer service and you want someone to do better when it comes to empathetic dialogue. Well, how are you measuring that? Well, we haven't gotten any complaints lately. Oh, well, so my marriage is doing well if my spouse doesn't complain about me for a couple of weeks. Is that what that means? But we kind of fall into these patterns of like, well, I'm checking in more, and therefore those things make me feel, the manager, make me feel like I'm doing something that's more hip and relevant, but I'm really not doing a whole lot for the employee in those weekly check-ins.
I think because the rationale behind having weekly check-ins, if they're robust check-ins and you have 5 in a row and they're great, have that 6th week, no problem. Yes. But if you have 3 just sort of mailing it in, but it's a compliance, we have to do it every week. I've always said management is about effectiveness, and it came out during COVID in terms of productivity. Everyone, the older generational leadership thought the younger generational workforce was going to sit at home, watch sports or watch movies, eat popcorn. 80% of people were as, if not more, productive during COVID.
Yeah.
So, and the quiet quitting, I think I've talked to you about this before. It's like, we've always had them. When I came out of law school, they were clock punchers. They show up, they do the bare minimum.
We used to call it presenteeism.
There you go.
Right?
There you go. So it's not a new thing. However, when you talk about those dreaded weekly meetings, right? Because very few of them are effective. We promote the concept of event-based interaction. And if you have to have 3 meetings in a week because there's a hot topic going on, or there's a fire raging at some client's office, and you need to really, help them effectively, and it's going to require 3 or 4 meetings that week, then you do it. And if you don't need any meetings that week because there's nothing else
and don't make them an hour each. Come on.
And don't do them at 8:30 in the morning on Mondays.
This is where
5 o'clock or 4 o'clock on Fridays.
Right. You and I both know that effectiveness, if we're really looking to effectively manage the performance of those for whom we have responsibility, then do it to set them up for success, not you. I say this all the time to HR practitioners, and certainly I've had some back and forth with some people. When HR practitioners are picking any kind of software, and I'm going to lean into HRIS and or payroll, they very often look for what will work best for me. That's the first. If it winds up being decent for the rest of the people in the company, that's fine. But I'm the one who's in this system day in and day out.
Yep.
And the problem there is you're supposed to be looking at it for how you can serve those for whom you have responsibility. So if the vast majority of people are on the road, right? You're some sort of transportation company, third-party logistics, or you have multi-site restaurant, or you've got, whatever it might be, multi-shift medical, whatever it is, does that system help to support what they need in order to have confidence in the organization in supporting if you can't say yes, then it's the wrong system for you to pick for what you want to do. I think it's the same way when it comes to the mechanics around something like a performance appraisal. Is that thing really serving the people that it's meant to serve, or is it just helping you check a box to say, whoop, we did them for 2023, they're done?
That's exactly the problem. I had a prospect I was pitching to years ago, big sprinkler installation and maintenance company, and the person in charge of HR was a really nice guy. And I said, well, what are you currently using? That's one of my first questions. And why are we on this call? Because if you're not happy with, obviously you're not happy with what you're using, or you're not looking to replace it. So he said they used a system and a form that they've developed over the years. I said, really? Well, when's the last time you updated it? He goes, oh, it was before I came on board. I'm like, well, would you mind scanning that and emailing it to me? I just want to look at it. You can scrub whatever, the copyright at the bottom of the first page said 1977. And that's the 360, the review that they fill out for their people.
Yeah.
So you're using something that's 50 years old.
And listen, let's make sure we give props for those of us who remember that year.
Yes.
Age doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but we know that what we were measuring in the 70s versus what's being measured today is probably not exactly the same thing. So
1,000%. And why you were measuring those things. And why you were measuring those things. Right. And I told this guy, I said, listen, you don't need to use Ripple if you don't want to. I get it. You're comfortable with this, but please don't use this anymore. The lawyer in me was like, oh my, that's a bad question.
Yes.
All him, he pronouns, just as an example.
Right.
I'm like, do you only have male employees? Well, of course not. I'm like, well,
right. What's happening here? What is happening here?
We shouldn't be having to have this conversation, but if you go with Ripple, great. If you go with somebody else, that's fine too, but please don't use this anymore. And it goes to the compliance check the box exercise.
Yes.
To your point. HR, talent appraisals, performance appraisals. We've always used this. It's this 360. My brother worked for a big pharmaceutical company, and he used to just copy and paste his 360s from 2022 into 2023. Change the date.
And we've crushed managers though too. Let's make sure we don't make it all sound like it's anti-manager, because it's
absolutely not. Yep.
Your brother, I remember my dad. They did theirs in April, where their annual performance appraisals were done in April throughout the company. And my dad grew his department really well. They were really high performing, like high functioning, really decent department. He had 41 appraisals he had to do every April. I'm going to tell you something. The people that he started with on that weekend before,
Mhm.
doing the appraisal, did much better than the last few that he had to finish because he was out of steam. He just was getting it done. He didn't, you have all those issues that creep in as well. Why are we setting managers up to do 40 performance appraisals in a small window of time? You're asking for a problem, and it's not fair to the manager to have to sit and all of a sudden create these things. So no wonder he would copy right from previous years, because you're like, I'm not spending 72 hours doing all of this,
if not longer. And one of the things that we try to avoid at all costs is what your father used to go through. It's called survey fatigue. So our teams, we never want teams bigger than 5 or 6, because even if it's a sub team to a department, you don't want to complete. What we do is we give and receive feedback on a monthly basis through short surveys. So if you have 25 surveys to complete, to your point, those first 5, 6, they're going to get accurate, genuine, actionable information. Those poor last 15, we're 1 to 5 scale, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. I don't care who they are, what they've done. I want to get through this process and I want to complete it. Again, why are you doing it? Are you doing it just because you have to say you do it and there's a formal process? Or are you doing it to get effective information that as a manager, owner, leader, even as a coworker, you can utilize to increase the workplace experience? I mean, we're all retaining employees is tough enough. Retaining good employees, assets, upper tier, management candidates, that is super hard. Because do they want to stay in an organization where there's we're doing it just because we're doing it? Is that healthy for my professional development? And to your point, not piling up on managers, because it's kind of always been done this way. So
and we haven't really taught the managers how to do it either, quite frankly.
Again, not to pile up on managers, but a lot of managers are promoted based on tenure, not skill set, and that's not fair to the top salesperson. Well, we need to name an SVP, so we're going to name the top salesperson.
That's
that person might not be the best manager.
And you're totally right. And it isn't a slight to that person who's been promoted necessarily. But if you're going to base it on tenure, to your example, then okay, but at least give this person resources and training and investment to help them be as possibly successful as they can be. When you just hand them like that form from 1977 and say, hey, here's what you use to do the appraisals for everybody, every February, they're just going to go, okay. They're left to figure out, well, what does this question really mean that I'm answering? I think it means this, so I'm going to do it this way, because no one's really helping me know how to do these things. And managers work without definitions sometimes on these appraisals. And quite frankly, so do employees. So employees read a particular question or, in a survey to say, oh, I think this means this, and so I'm answering it this way. And the manager reads it and is like, that's not even what I want to know. I want to know this. And then you also have employees who struggle with the idea of meeting expectations, because we haven't done a great job of explaining getting a meets expectations may not be the worst thing in the world. Why are you upset about that? I exceed expectations. Have I explained to you what exceeding looks like? I'm just picking those terms, right? Like whatever it might be that you use. If I'm not mad that you meet expectations, that's your job description. Like, you're doing it. Great job.
Return to the concept of, does John meet expectations or exceed expectations on November 29th, 2023, or the last 4 weeks versus the last?
Because I know this is coming. I know the appraisal's coming, right?
Yeah. And so he knows every year that last quarter, I'm going to try to crush it because I want my manager to give me a good review. And so when you can gamify anything in an organization, it's not good. And when you can look at providing a different experience for your employees who are really expecting, a 25-year-old in 2023 in terms of what they're looking to accomplish versus 1990 is totally different, because society's different.
We've allowed it to evolve, right?
Yeah, shockingly, right? It's good stuff.
It's good stuff because there's more opportunity even. people are doing things. I say this, when it comes to job requirements around college degrees, and you can't say, I've got my degrees up on the wall, I'm happy with them. I'm not mad at them, right? It was good for me to get them for what I do. But I think it was like 4 of the top 10 billionaires, I think it's 4 right now, don't have a college degree. They may have started college, just didn't finish. They don't have, okay. So it can't be that the mark of success is having that degree. I'm not mad at the degree, but that can't be the mark of success, right? It used to be, in a time gone by, that going to college was, the percentage of people who did it was smaller than where it is today. It's almost like, 13th grade for everybody. They just move right into a freshman year somewhere to do something, right? And I'm not trying to give people a hard time about that, but the context of it has changed. Well, the context of work has changed.
Well, and think about technology even.
Yes.
Technology.
Yes.
We had word processors out of in college, right? We have the computer I'm on right now is probably 1,000 times more powerful, if not more, than the computer I had 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
And 100,000 times more powerful than the computer I had in 1992. So if we have built up technology, if we've changed as organizational appreciation for even like DEI, right? For knowing that certain things aren't just important, they're critical.
Yeah.
They have to be implemented. And in 1993, that didn't happen. And in 1993, there was no expectation for it.
And beyond affirmative action, right? Where you're looking at some numbers for some companies and it was numeric. Well, that's this, in many ways, it's the same as an appraisal. If it's just kind of numbers on a piece of paper that sit in a drawer, what is that really doing for you?
Again, why are you doing it?
Why are we doing
it to comply? Then it's not, you're not adding any benefit to a company. And
I'm curious, when you look at, because this isn't all like a dumping on everything that has to do with performance management. I think we're really trying to highlight some things from a performance appraisal standpoint, number one, to say, what's the form and function behind that annualized look? And is it really serving you in the way that you would need it to serve you? But I'd also say there's been some decent strides within some organizations as to how they really do want a robust collaborative approach to managing performance within an organization. You mentioned 360s a while ago, right? And I remember when 360s were,
all the rage,
right? Everybody's doing it. And then we started to get exposed to the bias that was evident in the 360s, who's friends with whom, and hey, your review is going to help me get my, top end salary bump that I'm looking for, because it's all tied to comp, which is a problem. That's a whole other subject. But I wonder though, what have you seen, I'll say, over the last 12 to 18 months that's been like, this is the right way to think about and to approach and maybe even do in some organizations?
It's a great question. I think part of the answer to that question is the last 18 months, the last 36 months, right? I mean, talk about crazy, just changes, pivoting, success, coming out on top, victorious. Some companies didn't make it, but a lot of companies learned that it's okay to trust technology, and hybrid work can work as long as you do it correctly. I've seen a lot of, I've had a lot of great discussions with company leaders and managers that want to change the status quo, and they want to have something or have a process or have a culture that attracts and keeps good people. I've always said, in the companies I've managed and run, I've never received a 2-week notice from a quiet quitter, or whatever we want to call those people. They just kind of go along and collect their check. When you look at the last 18 months, post-COVID, during COVID, pre-COVID, I think we all sort of took stuff for granted before March 2020. I think we all just assumed you chug along, you make some money, you have some security, and you go. I think the last 3+ years have shown us that's a bad model.
That's
You have
right.
to appreciate people. You have to acknowledge people. And part of what needs to happen in that appraisal process is really celebrating the success. You know, our generation grew up on the annual review that was, can't tell John he's too good because he's going to get a big head and he's going to go get another job. We can't tell Noah he's too good because he's going to go make 20 grand more at some firm down the road. That's a bad process. It's okay to be critical as long as there's a reason for it, but you have to celebrate the things that people do right. And if you can't celebrate anything your employees are doing correctly, then that should probably tell you the importance of that employee within your organization.
Yeah.
And I've seen that a lot. I've seen in the last year and a half. I think there's also the fact that boomers lead differently than Gen Xers, and Gen Xers lead differently than millennials, and I'm sure Gen Zers will lead differently than millennials. It's who you learn from, and you learn the good stuff, and more importantly, you learn from the bad stuff. Most of my leadership qualities are learning lessons from what I didn't like about prior bosses. And, you know, it's the fraternity mentality. I was not in a fraternity, but everyone hates hazing. Hazing's wrong, obviously. Everyone hates the process of pledging for a fraternity, but they don't change it, or they've come around the last 10, 15 years. But once you're in the position to monitor the pledging, you don't change it because you went through it. So you're going to have other people go through it. That mentality of business ownership is horrific. And if you want to drive up retention rates, if you want to reduce attrition, if you have that business model, good luck. Because people want to know that you appreciate what they do right, and steer their projects, steer their accomplishments, work on their skill sets that they have in terms of what they're doing within your organization.
And it's not sugarcoating either at all.
Nope.
Right? I mean, that's not what you're saying, because I think that the glass can be half full as opposed to half empty, but it's still half full, right? There's still more that can be done. And the more has to be contextualized. You have to give people direction, consideration, and then resources. Because I may be killing myself to get that glass to be half full. I can't imagine as an employee how to get more into that glass. I can't imagine it. And so this performance management conversation may open a door to put it on the table to say, this is what's happening. And now let's work the next 30 days, 60 days to unpack this, and this, so that you can start to see that glass move from half full to 3/4 full. Because I know you can. It is nothing to do with my belief that you're unable. It has everything to do with you don't know. In a particular, you just didn't know, and we're not doing a great job of it. And to be honest with you, employee, as the manager, I'm realizing I may not know. And now I have to go get resourced myself, because I don't know how to. Maybe I love your point, right? Maybe I was a really successful operator, and then they promoted me. And there was a portion of my success as operator that, quite frankly, was natural. There was a natural flow to how I did some things that gelled with the work that had to get done. Now I'm being asked to sort of replicate that. I don't even know if I could give it words, let alone process. Can someone help me unpack that? If you just keep yelling at this operator, now manager, to say your team stinks, you're not doing everything you need to, you're now going to not only lose the staff below this person, but you're going to wind up losing this manager that was a great operator. That's not the right way to. There's got to be something that we're missing, and a lot of it is informational investment in people.
And that's what we started out talking about. Like, what can you do? Have regular interaction. And it's not weekly, Tuesday at 2:00 every week for a meeting. Maybe that works for some organizations. That doesn't work at a lot. But the biggest issue I have with the annualized component is it's almost always tied to compensation. So you want to create an anxious event for a junior person? Like, I mean, whatever we're going to talk about for 10 or 15 minutes is going to end with a dollar discussion.
They're flipping over the paper. They're flipping that paper over.
And so for the one problem with that is, as a junior person, you're like, okay, yeah. What's my raise? What's my bonus? As opposed to 12 months of interaction where that compensation discussion could be 5 minutes. Because, these are the numbers. Let's go through them.
Hold it at a different time. I don't need that. We're not here to talk about comp. We're here to
You
talk
should
about
always break up comp.
performance.
You should always break up comp and performance
Yeah.
because it's too much. It's
Too
too much for
much.
the manager.
Yep.
And it's too much for the people.
And
Because
all the effort that a manager puts into that appraisal, the management dial, it's lost because they're not hearing it.
yeah.
I'm totally.
Until you can appreciate what the manager's doing, right? The manager's doing his or her job effectively. You're at a company for 2 years. The manager's been there for 15. You're 24. You don't know what's going on, but you're trying to learn. Well, if you have a compensation and a performance appraisal review discussion in 20 minutes for 12 months of employment, I mean, come on.
Something's wrong.
How effective could that actually be?
Something's wrong. Yeah.
And so change it and
Yeah.
try something. And I think it's always interesting if you know a problem. It's Einstein, right? If you keep doing the same thing and you get the same results and you expect different results, that's the definition of insanity. It's not just the performance appraisal; it's everything else. It's the modern work day or work week. Monday to Friday, it works. It worked, but when you text your employees on a Saturday, then if you're the boss, all bets are off. You can't use technology in one direction and then say, no, I want you Monday through Friday in the seat.
All right. I mean, there's so much that, that's a whole other
That's a whole different discussion.
Whole different thing to unpack. But
Episode
this was really fun. Thank you
Yeah,
for kind of
had a great
kicking this
time.
around with me.
Yeah.
I would just say, for everybody that's listening, challenge your performance management process. Look, kick the tires.
Yep.
Is it as effective as you think it is? Don't just ask yourself. Do an ad hoc sort of survey with some folks. Just ask. And ask with, make sure they understand there's no fear of reprisal. Just ask what their thoughts are on it. It's probably time to do it.
And John, if there is fear of reprisal, right?
Well, it tells you a whole lot.
It tells you volumes.
A whole lot.
You ask your people for information to help them and to help the organization, and you're concerned that they might be concerned about retaliation. That says everything I need to know regarding the culture of that organization.
And so if you want to keep chatting with us about this, obviously, please reach out to me at Humoriso. If you want to reach out to Noah, please connect online at Ripple Analytics. Do a Google search for either of our companies. You'll be able to find us and connect with us to chat further. Noah, thanks, buddy. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks, John. A pleasure.